Hello and welcome. I'm your host, Janice Budd. Over the past 5 years, there's been somewhat of a revolution in the way we get our news and information. And what has happened is nothing short of revolutionary. In 2010, for example, it was Twitter which brought the first news of the Haiti earthquake to the outside world. In the last few weeks in Britain, a network run by mothers pressured advertisers to boycott the News of the World newspaper following allegations of phone hacking and bribery, and they succeeded in the demise of that paper. And even here in Jamaica, we see a recent case of social media influencing a police investigation to the point where the police announced that they would change how they used a very popular term, person of interest. So today we'll be tackling those issues and examining what do these changes mean for media organizations, governments, and you, the citizens of the Caribbean. We have with us as our panelists today, Mark Beckford, the online content coordinator of the Jamaica Gleaner Company. Next to him, we have Annie Paul, who is a broadcaster, publisher, and former writer with the Sunday Herald, who now runs a blog. Next to her, we have Karyl Walker, who is the online news content editor with the Jamaica Observer. And we have Dr. Paul Ashley, who is an attorney at law and political commentator, and also the owner of a blog. In addition, we have a very wide and varied audience made up of media practitioners and managers from across the region. Students from 2 universities in Jamaica round out our audience. Welcome, everybody. Thanks for being here. This program is produced by the Commonwealth Broadcasting Association with support from UNESCO, the Caribbean Broadcasting Union, TVJ, CVM, CPTC, and LIME. We go to a break, and we'll be right back. Welcome back. I'm Janice Budd. We're here discussing the issue of social media and the influence it is having on democracy in the Caribbean. I want to ask a question by a show of hands. How many people in here have a Facebook page? Oh, I think everybody. I think there might be a few persons who did not decide to join the Facebook clan. How many people have a Twitter account? Wow, are you tweeting that we're here with CBA Live today in Kingston? You're in the process of? Okay. Well, this is just two examples, I would say, of how social media is influencing how we live our everyday lives and how we influence our own lives in the countries in which we live. I wanted to say, though, should this matter to anybody? Should this matter that social media has penetrated our lives to the extent where we use them to share, to communicate, we write every single moment of every day on Twitter and post it to our friends? Is that necessary? We have Mr. Cozier there who says it's not. But for the past 100 years or so, we've really relied on traditional media. And clearly there's a change that is sweeping the country, sweeping the Caribbean, sweeping the world. And we want to ask some of our panelists, how do they feel about whether or not the reliance on traditional media is still relevant? I'm going to put that to Dr. Ashley.
Traditional media will always reserve a place in people's lives. But the new media has its basis in digital technology. What this means is that there is an ease to capture data, manipulate data, store data, transmit data, retrieve data. In fact, it is, if you prefer, a widening of freedom of expression, a deepening of democracy. But with that comes the invasion of privacy. I now wonder when I go out, and I tend to misbehave if anybody will capture me on their cell phones. I don't know who has a Facebook page and who will decide to put my picture on it because somebody took them beside me without my permission. I don't know if I'll be on Facebook tomorrow morning. But let's put it this way. It is good in that it widens information gathering. It is also dangerous. It is dangerous to the extent that we can manipulate data so that I can appear tonight in Rio de Janeiro and the recipients won't know that this has been a manipulation. And it can be useful in people who have ulterior motives in defaming individuals. And these individuals can be politicians or private citizens. What we must expect is that the state will be forced to react. One of the ways the state will react is that the state will demand that every user of a smartphone and every user of a computer be registered. So the big brother will know who you are and what you have said, and you'll be held to account for your advent into unprotected journalism.
Well, speaking of wading into unprotected waters, journalists have had to contend with this new phenomenon, and it clearly will influence and does influence how they do their traditional jobs of reporting the news to the public. Karyl Walker, who is now confined to a chair at the Observer producing online news content, was once a beat reporter in one of the hottest crime beats, I believe, of his time. Karyl Walker, how has new media influenced your job?
Well, it has broadened my horizons, so to speak. I have learned more. I no longer pound the pavement, although I miss it very much. But there was a saying that the illiterate of the 21st century is those who don't want to unlearn and relearn. We have to relearn. This is the way the world is going. This is the way my children are going. They had Facebook pages before I did, and I was forced to unlearn and relearn. And it's a process of life. We learn new things every day, and we just have to adapt. That's my view.
Mark Beckford, you're in a similar position at another newspaper here in Jamaica, the Jamaica Gleaner, and you too are a reporter. What do you say to what Karyl has to say?
I agree with what Karyl has to say. Journalism has changed, or how journalists access information, or we gather information has changed. For example, there was I'm sure some members of the audience will remember the police officer who unfortunately, was angry and he killed his family. And the first, a reporter in the newsroom called me over and said, here's his picture on Facebook. So I went, I searched for his name, pulled up, fortunately his wall wasn't private, pulled up his wall, searched the history, saw that he changed his relationship status a couple of times, and it fit into what happened. So journalism has definitely changed. We crowdsource now. We use Twitter to get information. We use hashtags to gather information. We ask questions online, so we use comments to get information. So gathering information has definitely changed for journalists.
Well, Annie Paul, one of the things new media has definitely done is increased access to people in high places and increased access to documents that previously would have been hidden. We know that you straddle new media and traditional media. You were with the Sunday Herald, with the Herald, I believe, and you run a blog. Can you say, does it make a difference that you're able to post things in your blog that traditional media houses can't put because of fear of libel?
Yes, absolutely. It does make a difference. For instance, in the recent, this killing of this young boy, which has become known in Jamaica as the X6 killing, because the person who did the shooting was driving a BMW X6. There has been a great hesitation on the part of the major media houses to actually name the owner of the car, right? And only one newspaper, the Sunday Herald, which is the one I used to write for, had the guts to publish his name. Now, unfortunately, they are not, their website isn't very current. I took that information and put it on my blog and got almost 4,000 hits that day, right? Whereas the highest I had got up to then in 3 years of blogging was 1,100 hits. So that just shows you the impact of being able to post material which isn't available anywhere else.
I wanted to throw the question to members of our audience, regional journalists. I wanted to know, in your experiences, has there been a definite impact in terms of how quickly you access information, how quickly you're able to put it out through traditional media versus your Twitter account? Karen Madden James, does it make a difference that people are posting things to Facebook faster than you can verify your stories?
I believe what that has done is to force a change with how traditional media works. I believe there's a place for such agents as underground news reporting and Twitter and Facebook and so on. But there's a danger, there's an inherent danger in that these reporters do not have to substantiate their claims, for instance. There's nobody suing. Who are the ONGR reporters? Nobody knows. So they are not liable to the same ethics of journalism that traditional media is obliged and obligated to. Somebody will sue you. Nobody's going to sue. And anonymity is bliss. Nobody knows who you are. But I believe that there's a place for social media, but we have to differentiate the positions and the responsibilities because they are different.
There's a Facebook page, and I think those of us here in Jamaica know about it. It's called On the Ground News Reports. It essentially relies on reports of eyewitnesses. It prides itself in being first with information all the time, and it suggests that the average citizen is good enough to be a reporter. They were unable to attend this discussion, but we did post some questions to them, and we wanted to take some of their responses in their absence. One of the questions we did ask was, how does OGNR, On the Ground News Reports, think it has affected or changed traditional media? And that's their response. There have been very obvious changes. Both major newspapers made substantial changes to their websites in order to compete, for example, and all news agencies began making greater use of OGNR's markers. One major newspaper actually created its own Facebook page, and the other attempted to bring breaking news online. I wanted to pose a question to our panelists. Yes, Annie Paul, you're chomping at the bit at this one.
Yes, because, while I hear all the cautions that are being expressed about the dangers, remember that it's equally easy to correct a mistake online, You have to simply put the information out that what you had said previously was wrong. If not, others will correct you online. So it's not as if somebody says something online and that becomes biblical in its truth value, It's easily corrected, in fact. And with on-the-ground news reports, what's the difference between, the traditional media also always used to ask people to phone in. Have you seen anything that might be newsworthy? Please phone us, right? One assumes that they then go and do some sort of verification exercise, and I presume OGNR does the same.
Yes, and that is part of their responses. So we will get to that in a second. I wanted to ask Karyl Walker to weigh in on that issue because they're direct competition with you as an online news media
Yes, they are,
editor.
but I'm still not worried, as we have a wider audience that we carried over from our traditional days, and we are seen, I would believe, to be a more credible source than the OGNR. So I'm not worried that, it's very good that they are doing this thing with alacrity, but I think we do more checks. Sometimes we find that the underground news reports not entirely correct, and we do our thing, they do theirs. We're not worried.
In terms of the Gleaner, and they did say that newspapers actually copying them, are actually copying them.
Nothing is new under the sun in terms of, technology's changed, but, still information going on. I think that there's I might get into trouble for saying this, but I think OGNR is great in terms of what they brought to the table. They have forced different media houses to step their game up, so nothing is wrong in that. I think there's a bit of, in media and what we learn about people being gatekeepers, and I think as journalists sometimes we're very defensive about how information reaches the public. However, I think that sometimes as practitioners we take our audience not to be very smart, and I think people know the difference between OGNR and the Gleaner. I think people know that if they want credible news, if they want something verified, they go to the Gleaner. If they want to vent and get on bad, they go to OGNR.
I think you touched a few corners on the panel there with that one.
I really go to that Facebook page to see what's happening before it is corroborated by the traditional media. I would say that they are first in line. My concern is that we might run the risk of shedding all the ethics and the quote-unquote professionalism of traditional journalism, and we're now into sus, gossip, rumor-mongering, even slander. And worst of all, in my younger days, we used to read the what you call hard copy now, to learn some English. I mean, it was compulsory reading of the Gleaner way back to know English. Have you seen Twitter communications, the new English? And can any of the younger generation now write a letter in hard copy? I have difficulty in even understanding Twitter, but it reflects my age and my love of English.
Annie Paul.
Excuse me, traditional media ethics as exemplified by the News of the World?
No, not exemplified by the News of the World.
And Twitter, and talking about Twitter and the language and so on, actually Twitter has improved many people's language because you have to reduce your thoughts to 140 characters, right? So it means you become aphoristic in what you say. And incidentally, every day it gives me great pain and also pleasure to go through the newspapers with my marker, marking all the errors I find. The language is atrocious in the printed media here, and on radio and on TV. So I don't know what you're talking about.
No, I see. You are fine. Where are you? And these kind of things in a very shortened form. And people now, youngsters who have been using their thumbs, they can't type a letter. They can't write a letter.
You don't need to type a letter
Well,
nowadays.
maybe I'm old-fashioned. I still think in some kinds you need to type a letter, know how to type a letter.
Karyl Walker wanted to add to this discussion.
My views are that there's a space for both the new English, if you might call it that, where you use the numeral 2 instead of writing TWO because of your lack of characters. But there's also a bigger space for the traditional English language. Let's say somebody comes to an interview to be a reporter and comes and sits in front of the Sunday editor, Janice Budd, and says, there is a space for traditional English, and we ought not to throw out the baby with the bathwater. We ought to embrace the traditional English language, teach it to our children, but understand that they communicate in their language and accept them. And maybe it's a generation gap, maybe I'm old too, but I tend to want to understand what my children are writing.
Well, the new media landscape, and I have to ask this at this point, is it forcing traditional media to step up their game in terms of how quickly they put out their information? I will go to this gentleman here, and then we'll ask Mr. Kozia to weigh in on the matter. Could you please say your name? And
yes, Mohammed.
It's on. We're here.
Mohammed Sattar from NCN, Guyana. Yeah, I would, just a short comment, it seems that new media is here. It's here to stay, obviously. And traditional media basically has its role as well. But what generates change in a society is a public outcry, basically. And even though new media can start a process, right, unless it gets into the traditional media, you cannot generate that public sentiment. So I think, we have to look at this in that context. The new media might be first. It might get the story first, but when the story is vetted and verified by traditional media and printed in traditional media, then the public begins to gravitate and gather behind the issue.
It gets legs and it's believable.
Right.
Patrick Kozia, head of the CBU, I'm sure, the Caribbean Broadcasting Union, I'm sure you have thoughts on this issue.
Yes, I do actually. I think sometimes we get confused by believing that speed trumps accuracy. I think that's something we have to be very careful about. While what Annie was saying about going back and correcting is true, I think you also have a credibility problem when you have to go back and correct too often, and then the media begins to suffer in terms of reputation. What traditional media has to do is to see new media as an extension of the old media franchise, and not to see it in exclusive terms.
I want you to pass the mic to Mr. Robinson, Claude Robinson, one of our, well, shall I say, stalwarts in the local media industry, and one-time manager of the Jamaica Broadcasting Corporation. What is your opinion, sir, on how we're forced to contend with the cheapness of Twitter accounts and Facebook accounts and trying to keep traditional media houses open and functioning?
Well, I think two things. First of all, what we see in companies like groups like OGNR is what's referred to as the people formerly known as audience are now the creators of content. And so that the people formerly known as audience used to be the real main hub of the business model of traditional media. You put together eyes and ears, and the larger numbers of eyes and ears you can put together, the more advertising you can charge, and the more advertising you can create. So the first impact on the finances of traditional media is the fact that the audience is now fragmented and move all over the place, and so the putting together big audiences for big advertising costs is no longer there. And so one of the first things that traditional media has to find a way is, as Patrick says, to monetize what they're putting out online. And so far, nobody has found a profitable way to do it, although there are some models which are working better than others.
Thank you so much. Mr. Robinson and his colleagues and the other members of our audience will continue this discussion when we come back. We go to a break. Welcome back. I'm Janice Budd. New media journalism, despite the positives, has not escaped criticism. We touched on some of the issues before the break, and now we'd like to continue with the drawbacks. And one of the biggest ones that we've heard about is inaccuracy, unverified information. I'll throw this one to Dr. Ashley. The speed. Please go ahead. Okay. I was actually just saying the speed at which news is delivered.
Yes, but
clearly is going to influence whether you can be accurate in new media.
But there's also technology involved. That the same technology that gave you that speed could be very useful if it captured it on video. Then we wouldn't need to have these questions. If somebody employed their smartphones and took a video of exactly what happened, then that would be sufficient accuracy. So I'm saying, yes, the written word can be used, manipulated, but there's also the advantage of the smartphone being used to capture exactly what has taken place. And as you know in defamation, truth is the defense. So if they had captured on tape the killing of an individual by members of the state, as happened recently, then that's good enough.
I wanted to actually put the question to members of our audience who are not from Jamaica. You must have incidents in your own country where social media has put something out and had to retract it. Yes, your name?
Christy Ramnarine from Trinidad, TV6. It's not an instance where the social media corrected it, but a letter came out probably about 3 weeks ago. An incident happened at Movietown, which is the Cinemaplex in Trinidad, where a couple claimed that they were robbed and a lot of cash and other things were stolen from their car, and that they were also badly beaten. Now, this email circulated to everyone. Broadcasts went out on people's Blackberries, and it prompted the media to do stories on this. And, of course, the owner of Movietown was contacted, and he gave his side of the story. And he defended himself, and he said, well, No one reported such an incident to us, but people came down on him because of the broadcast that was going on. People already had a perception in their mind that this is what happened. Lo and behold, a week ago, our television station did an investigative report on it, and it turned out to be false.
Thank you. Well, Karyl Walker, I was actually coming to you because I'm sure you have something to say about how this affects your work.
It just goes back to the point I made earlier that we need to incorporate both. We probably need to stop calling it new media. It's just an extension of how media is. But we can't forget, when in doubt, check it out. Still in doubt, leave it out. There are certain rules that goes with reporting and journalism that you could have come with 1 million BlackBerry messengers, 1 million smartphones, and 1 million whatever kind of social networks that you're going to use. You have to stick to those tenets of journalism, and that's just how the craft is practiced and should be practiced.
Dr. Ashley, we think that on the heels of this, there are certain issues of libel and defamation that must come to the fore. As an attorney, what are your thoughts on new media and the fact that you can't sue an entity online?
Well, I don't think that is correct, but let me say this, and I started it in my opening sentence. The state will reach a position that it will insist that every owner and user of a computer, smartphone, or any of the new technologies utilized in what we call new media is registered. So Big Brother will know who you are. It will also be a way of protecting the rights of your neighbor. If you decide for whatever malicious reason to slander your neighbor, right, with some malicious gossip on your BBM, it will now become increasingly easier to identify that source of information. So whilst you enjoy the protection nowadays, that protection, in my view, will soon fade away.
And I hear people just chomping at the bit to respond. Yes, you in the back row. Please introduce yourself.
I'm Vivian Bedwood, Northern Caribbean University, and to Dr. Ashley, is that the name? He keeps saying that computers and smartphones and all of these things need to be registered. But when you do that, you take away from people freedom of the press, freedom of speech, etc. And of course, we are living in a democratic society, so we should be free to talk and to report whatever we want to report.
Of course, this discussion wouldn't really be a discussion about new media if we didn't talk about WikiLeaks. WikiLeaks represents a controversial, yet some people would say useful use of new media. It gives what is considered classified and sensitive information to the public, and this is, of course, information that you would not normally be able to put your hands on, let alone read online. Dr. Ashley, I wanted to ask you, what is the status of government documents and WikiLeaks? A politician here recently suggested that it was intellectual property and therefore sacrosanct. What say you?
It may be sacrosanct, but it can be stolen. And then you take whatever means of redress you seek and being able to collect. I think that the WikiLeaks saga has shed some light as to how governments and political actors, power brokers operate. It is an eye-opener for anyone who studies politics and has an interest in politics. It confirms to a large extent what we have theorized about at the university and elsewhere and read in books. It is really a stark expose as to the quote-unquote loyalties and dependencies of our political actors and how they relate to superpowers in the region. For me, it is the most revealing bit of data that has come in my lifetime, and I'm looking forward to more.
Well, we'd like to hear from one of our... This gentleman in the front is preempting my question. Please comment.
Yes, you know, the WikiLeaks issue basically is based on a simple question. Is it correct or morally correct to use information obtained by legal means, you know, in the traditional media? And if we go back to what is happening in England and the Murdoch affair, you know, Murdoch himself admitted that any information that was obtained unethically or illegally should not have been used in the press, right? And people have been arrested and all that now. So here we have another guy who has stolen these cables, basically, and we are quite comfortable with using them. That seems to be a little bit of splitting the hairs there in terms of moral ethics.
I wanted to ask Mark Beckford, because it is the Gleaner newspaper who has actually used WikiLeaks to its benefit and has caused quite a stir among government leaders here.
WikiLeaks obviously has caused a lot of discussion in the newsroom, but aside from different complications of morality, whether it's right ethically, whether people have a right to this information, because after all, it is our money that these politicians are using to drive to the embassy to, talk. I think that it has, while it, probably has not dented many politicians' aspirations, it has just revealed what we have known, or suspected all along, and it is very good for discussion. I'm sure people here that read the website, see the comments, and people are really passionate about their country, and WikiLeaks, the cables help to just shed a different light for people.
Well, I'm coming to you in a minute, Annie Paul, but Karyl Walker, WikiLeaks actually gave the Observer then an opportunity to make its own pick.
I think WikiLeaks is wonderful. I mean, I'd love to be quoted saying the Gleaner is a disaster, WikiLeaks is wonderful. I mean, we get information. You might say it's illegally obtained, but if the information is accurate and true, that's my concern. We get information. Sometimes you get the information from the lady who sweeps up the ministry, who might accidentally buck up a document on the ground. And she knows my neighbor who might call me and says, well, I got this document. It's still illegal, but is it true? If it's true, that's my only moral concern. WikiLeaks, wonderful.
You agree with that?
I mean, absolutely agree with it. I think WikiLeaks is a game changer. It's going to be remembered in the next century as one of the most significant developments in the way information has been used and covered. And I think that it's kind of absurd to make the comparison with what is happening in England with the news of the world. It's not comparable. In that instance, there was an invasion of people's privacy, right? To the extent where you were listening to their messages before they heard them. And deleting them. So that's not comparable to what WikiLeaks represents.
Thank you. We're going to hold that discussion, this part of the discussion actually, and go to a break. And when we come back, we'll explore the issue of social media and democracy. Is it really influencing how we run our countries? Stay with us. We'll be right back. Thank you and welcome back. I'm Janice Budd. Now we turn to the future, and we'd like to begin with the predictions from the newest player in the new media market from this region, the OGNR page. We asked the question, where do you see traditional and new media going in the next few years? Their response was, they will each continue to pursue their objectives. Traditional media will continue to attempt to encourage their consumers to participate in the process. However, this will not prove fruitful. The two systems are incompatible. Dr. Ashley, incompatible, complementary. Which side do you come down on?
There is probably a false dichotomy between so-called old media and new media. The digital divide has brought what we call traditional journalism into step with what we call new journalism. The so-called old media has been forced to adapt to new technologies, the computer, emails, everything. They have even been online. It may be in the future we won't see hard copy newspapers. because it is well known that newspaper sales are declining rapidly. So people will now move and read the newspapers, quote unquote, online. So there are changes to be had, but it is not as if they are competing. This is how journalism has to adapt to changes in technology and to utilize them.
Well, I'll toss this question to the audience. Your thoughts on the future? Could you please introduce yourself and say where you're from? You could sit if you want. That's fine.
Great. All right. Andrea Polanco on GBTV News 5, Belize. I personally, I follow OGNR. I'm in Belize, but I studied in Jamaica. I want to keep updated on what's happening here still. I follow OGNR on Twitter. I like them on Facebook. And sometimes I contribute my 2 cents to what I think about issues taking place in Jamaica. In my country, for example, we don't have many people on Twitter. I don't think it has reached the level that it has as yet, that it's in Jamaica. We don't have many people blogging. But the future in Belize, what I do see from my news station, what we do is that we use these social networks, the social, different social media to complement what we do. For example, Belize is very big. It's twice the size of Jamaica. Sometimes it's very hard to access certain parts of the country. And there may be people over that side who we'd call and we'd tell them, you know what, we need a picture of that fire. And they're like, okay, we're going to post it on Facebook. You can get it from there. Sometimes we need a picture of certain person who, have that, of someone who died. And the family would say, oh, my daughter has a Facebook account. We don't have pictures because he didn't like to take pictures, but there is one. She has it on Facebook. So we can go there. We can get it off. So, of course, we don't see it as a competition. We see it as something that we can work together.
An optimistic view of the future. What about you, sir?
Well,
Please introduce yourself.
I'm Jay Earhart with Radio Cayman and the Cayman Islands, and I see it something that this, what you call new media now, is just an extension and a faster version of what mainstream media has been doing for years. Radio has done man-on-the-street interviews. Newspapers have taken letters from the editor. It's just a new way for the voice to be heard of the people.
Well, could I ask? Yes, please.
Clint Watson from the Broadcasting Corporation of the Bahamas. I think if we're going to survive in this day and age, we're going to have to adapt to changing and emerging trends. It's only natural that as time progresses and the world evolves, the electronic media and new media is going to be a part of what it is that we do. So the best thing to do is, rather than fighting it, to find the best ways to jump on board and to use it to your advantage. And we see it happening all over in broadcast. We use the media to communicate. We use the new forms of media to get information. It helps what we do. I think at the end of the day, while the world is appreciating this, they will still depend on mainstream media to give details, give facts, and to go beyond the story. So while new media may introduce it, they still will turn the TV on, open the newspaper to read the information behind the story. So there'll always be a place for us. But I think it's best to work along with it so that we last and benefit from it rather than fighting it.
Thank you. Ryan Gilkes. Sorry. Yes, that's my Jamaican pronunciation. I apologize. Mr. Gilkes.
Okay. I work with Starcom Network in Barbados, which is a part of the OCM network. Essentially, what we have depended on has been Facebook to get our message across. I have my own Facebook page that I give updates on. There's my Twitter. The company has their own Twitter page. But what we've introduced is something called your own mojo, your mobile journalist, where we depend on the public to send us the information. I believe that the systems are compatible. They're not incompatible. They complement each other in that I might be in a meeting. I can't listen to the radio all the time. I can't watch television all the time. I can't, in some instances, bring a newspaper in while I'm doing whatever I need to do. But my messages come to my phone via Twitter, via Facebook messaging, and even BBM. To say that traditional media will continue to try to encourage consumers to take part in the process, there is always a place in this business for the traditional media.
Okay, thank you so much. Young lady from NCU.
I'm from Northern Caribbean University, and I am in agreement that traditional media and new media are in fact compatible. Why? Because now new media has brought about journalists in everybody, right? Before, traditional media used to rely on ethics and certain code of conduct, professionalism. Well, today new media creates an avenue whereby persons can display or post what is happening around them.
Karyl Walker, Dr. Ashley said it's probably going to be the death of newspapers.
Eventually, as we know, the newspaper will go. In places like Jamaica, third world countries, it might go a little bit slower. But as we saw a couple of years ago in the United States, we saw the images of those newspaper kiosks, all of them empty. There are a lot of newspapers that, and it's tradition, these things might go, times change. But I personally think we're placing too much importance on underground news reports, maybe because they're like in your face and they're coming every minute. And I disagree in no uncertain terms that the things are incompatible. They have just modernized what we have been doing all the time. How did we get stories? You get a call from your correspondent, somebody knows you. There's a shooting down the road, 3 people are dead. Whether it's a police officer, a member of the public, whatever. This just makes it a little bit easier and more accessible because you can send it on your BB with a photograph. It's the same thing. So I think they have been a little bit forward in describing it the way they did. I'm a little bit slighted by that.
Okay, well, I'm going to ask Mr. Cozier, broadcast media is a little different from newspapers. People are always going to gravitate towards television and radio, especially in the Caribbean. New media is going to have what impact, you think, in the future?
Okay, let me just join that debate for a brief moment. To me, the only difference between new media and old media is technology lag. That's the only difference. And as long as that catches up, you're going to find an almost seamless relationship between the two. What will happen over time is some refinements will come to the system, some of the less credible players will get shaken out, and it will settle down. And it will settle down as an evolved media system. It is for that reason that I fear the language of OGNR is setting up a new adversarialism. This is what I'm seeing here. What they are basically doing is dissing traditional media and selling new media as a replacement. I think that's a false
They're going
paradigm.
overboard. They're extreme with that.
I think it's a false paradigm.
Annie Paul. Oh, I'm so sorry.
I just wanted to deal with the question you asked about the broadcast media. And by the way, I don't think newspapers will die. I think they will change into more analytical pieces and more investigative pieces, and they're going to be out of the hard news business as we know it. As far as broadcast media is concerned, broadcast media has always been closer to the technologies than the print side of it. As a consequence, they have not had as great a difficulty in trying to adapt and move to online and move to streaming and stuff like that. I believe that process will continue, and what we are seeing is really an evolution brought about by technology lag, and once that catch-up takes place, I think a lot of this debate is going to dissipate because there's really going to be not much of a difference.
Symbiotic relationship is what you're saying. Annie Paul?
Thank you. Actually, that was the point I was going to make, was that we were focusing too much on print media to the exclusion of, for instance, radio, not even TV. But I find radio is an extremely powerful medium, and in a country like Jamaica, it is, I would say, the most powerful medium, or the most it can reach the widest, it's the most pervasive technology, to the extent where I have actually started doing a radio program because I think that my blog can feed the radio program I do, and vice versa. It's not only it's not unidirectional. There's my Twitter feed and my blog are very much informed by what I listen to on radio, because I'm an avid radio listener. I won't apologize. I'm always listening to the radio because there's a lot of information you get there that you won't find in the newspapers or on television. And so these are, yes, it's going to be very much of a symbiotic relationship.
Is that an optimistic outlook, Mark?
No, I don't think it's far-fetched. And as several persons have been saying, it's just that the technology has changed, but you still have to make the call, write down the information, double-check, all that stuff. As to the I don't think the argument that if it's incompatible and, suggesting that some traditional media will be phased out. Personally, I don't think newspapers will die. I think a lot of people make in the U.S., I was studying in the U.S. in 2009 when the newspapers were going on. And it was the Colorado Rocky, it was the Christian Science Monitor went online, the Boston Globe shut down, so it wasn't much, and newspapers are still going on. And what newspapers have been doing, they have been, and what the Gleaner, has been doing, we're tying all our content together and using different platforms, and you'll see it in the Times. They say subscribe to the online, and you get the Sunday paper. So, I don't think the paper will die. I don't know if anybody saw when Barack Obama won, the lines around the Chicago Tribune. It was around the street, so people want...
They want something tangible
and
to hold on to.
Without the infrastructure as yet in Jamaica, the recent study said 15% of Jamaicans have internet usage. We love to think that Jamaica is Kingston, St. Andrew, Mandeville and Mobile, but it's not,
It's not. Dr. Ashley, we'll give the last word of our discussion to you, and we'll go right back to the origins of this. New media, traditional media, how is it going to impact democracy in the future in the Caribbean?
If by impacting democracy, we mean giving the ordinary man and woman in the street a greater say in their lives and influence on government, yes, it will. My concern is how will the small states of the Caribbean react to such things? Because political elites in the Caribbean, they are very sensitive and in fact paranoid. We must not for one think that what has happened elsewhere, that the state will sit by in Jamaica, in Guyana, in Barbados, in St. Lucia, and let it go that way. The state actors here are not afraid to use force and any other means at their disposal, legitimate or otherwise. So yes, it will enlarge the democratic process. Yes, it will deepen it, but be very wary of the reaction of paranoid states.
Thank you so much, Dr. Ashley. Well, I'm sure everybody is just dying to see how this will all play out, and we'll come back to discuss it. Of course, there's so much more that we could have put into this discussion, but time is of the essence here. It's been a really stimulating discussion, and of course, we want to thank our esteemed panelists, Matt Beckford, who is the online news editor at the Jamaica Gleaner, Annie Paul, who straddles traditional and new media with her blog, Karyl Walker, who is the online news content editor at the Jamaica Observer, and Dr. Paul Ashley, attorney and political commentator. We had a varied number of persons in our audience who all contributed to our discussion, and I know the discussion will continue once we end this session. I want to say thanks to you all for being here and for sitting through this hour with us. This program was produced by the Commonwealth Broadcasting Association with support from UNESCO, the Caribbean Broadcasting Union, TVJ, CVM, CPTC and LIME. So on behalf of a hard-working production team and hard-working journalists, whatever medium across the world, I'd like to say thank you for joining us. I'm Janice Budd.